there's these gaps in mental health. There's either huge waiting lists or the trauma-informed piece. There's just not, it's just not there.
So we have children who are being trafficked. Our foster care system, homes that can take children in, are so incredibly limited that these children that are victims of human trafficking are being sent to juvenile detention centers.
It's really important for any of the NGOs and any of the individuals who are working in trafficking or any heavy trauma-based work that they're making their self-care a priority.
Thank you so much for joining today's Greenlight Operation podcast. We are so excited to have Kim Sourbeer joining us today. Today, we're going to be talking about all things from human trafficking to healing, trauma, coaching. There is a lot of ground we're going to cover today, and we are very excited to have Kim, who is a professional in the field, has worked in the human trafficking field and the healing and recovery side of things as well. Very excited to have her professional expertise joining us today. So welcome, Kim, to our podcast. It is just an honor to have you joining.
Oh, thank you so much, Jordan. And it's an honor to be here with you.
Yeah. And Kim, we had a chance. I was going back and thinking through when we first met, and I think it was way back in either 2019 or 2020, which I know in the grand scheme wasn't that long ago, but it feels like eons ago.
It does.
And that was right when you guys were getting ready to launch the Dauphin County Human Trafficking Task Force.
Yeah, very beginning.
It was the beginning stages. And I think it was still the assessment phase of where do we go from here? We've got this need of human trafficking cases coming forward. And at that time, I think there were like 3 active cases of human trafficking. And it since blew up to 100 plus cases in very short amount of time.
It sure did.
And you were the lead victim advocate on all of that.
I was.
But through that, you had the opportunity. You saw really what was happening regionally in the world of human trafficking through that role, but also have since transitioned to an incredible new venture, which I hope to highlight today in our podcast, which is Earth Ray. Yes. And it's a new coaching and trauma healing and recovery nonprofit or business. How is that flowing? Can you share that with us?
Sure, absolutely. So Earth Ray empowers women seeking transformational growth from past trauma to find balance and fulfillment through a holistic, intuitive coaching.
I love that. That holistic approach is just so needed because a person, you see a lot of times where certain elements are addressed, and it's not bad, but to look at the whole of a person is really important. So what are some of those offerings that will be there with the coaching, and what does that look like?
Sure. So I do 3-month or 6-month packages. I mean, I do one-on-one coaching, but to get the best out of a coaching, you're really looking at like a 6-month commitment. And I open myself up to 2 sessions with them a month. They get free books, they get free literature, they get free education. It's a holistic approach. So it's really looking to coach the person as a whole, their spiritual, emotional, mental, physical well-being. It's not just a one-pronged approach. We partner with local therapists because it is really important when you have trauma. I'm not a licensed therapist. I don't want to be a licensed therapist. I'm a life coach.
Yep. Big difference.
Yeah. So we focus on the future and what they want out of life.
It's huge.
Really. So it's wonderful.
And that's huge because when you've been in trauma and have gone through that, it's hard to even think about the very next day because a lot of times you're in survival mode. And to break that cycle, it's a lot of work from the end of the individual, absolutely, but a community that's surrounding that person. And so it's amazing that you get to be part of that community, bringing them through that healing process. And you noted something of it's not just a quick fix. It's 3 months, 6 months, but it's a lifetime of healing. So setting them up for that success beyond is really important. What drove you to launch Earth Ray?
So when I was the lead advocate as you know, part of my role was to identify the NGOs in the community and make sure that they were qualified, that they had the education, that they really truly understood what trafficking was to be able to support our victims. Because, good intentions can so easily cause bigger problems. And one of the things that I realized was there's these gaps in mental health. There's either huge waiting lists or the trauma-informed piece. There's just not, it's just not there.
Yeah.
And so that was heartbreaking for me.
Yeah.
Life coaching has been a goal of mine for a number of years. I started working towards my master's degree and I think it was 2017 time period. It was prior to the development of the task force. But I was still a crime victim advocate. I specialized in domestic violence and child abuse, and still saw those same kinds of issues and the importance that survivors need for really having a team of educated people to support them.
Huge. And I think an important note as well, you were sharing with me earlier that Earthray will address a variety of trauma. It won't just be, while trafficking may be included in that, it's a diversity of offerings that you offer with that coaching as well. And can you share even a little bit of what motivated you to diversify in that as well?
I think that it was important for me to find balance.
Yeah.
And balance is really important. I am also a survivor, so not of trafficking, but I am a survivor. And so I had to learn what balance looked like in all areas of my life. Yep. So part of that is making sure that my caseload and my work is not all the heavy stuff.
It's true.
And trafficking is heavy and it's hard.
It's very heavy, especially in the seat that you were in as the lead advocate. But even now, I mean, just the exposure to, I believe it's one of the most twisted, heinous crimes. But, it doesn't always have to happen through trafficking. There's just such twisted and wickedness that exists. And then when you're a person that's one of the first individuals to hear somebody's story and to help, I think in our industry, and we've talked about this as well, of it's very common to see individuals who work in this industry deal with secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. And can you share a little bit, would you be willing to share what that kind of looks like and what that even is for a person who deals day in and day out with trauma?
Sure. I mean, and vicarious trauma is something that I'm very passionate about. Yeah. I've seen people experience it. I've personally experienced it. And it's funny, Jordan, I kind of prided myself on self-care and making sure everybody around me was doing it and making sure that I'm doing it. Yeah. And I thought I had nailed it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I actually left my previous position as lead advocate and started Earthray where I really identified, oh my goodness, I was being affected by this more than I realized. Yeah. And what that looked like for me was extra snappy,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Just and it was coming out to my husband and my kids, and that's not fair. Yep. It was overeating, not exercising quite enough. And I was still doing my meditations. I was still doing my spiritual work. But it crept in there. And I think I know what happened was I went from being in a situation where we were debriefing about this stuff on a regular basis, and I had a team who understood to there wasn't enough time for that. Yeah. And my location had changed a little bit, and so I didn't have that same team that I had initially had to kind of debrief some of this stuff out. And I didn't realize how vital that simple act was. And quite frankly, prior, I kind of got annoyed at the debriefing stuff a little bit.
Yeah, you're like, oh man, I've already been through it. Do I have to go through it again?
Yeah. But now I realize the importance and the value. So it's, your staff is, I know that you're very mindful of that. And It's really important for any of the NGOs and any of the individuals who are working trafficking or any heavy trauma-based work that they're making their self-care a priority.
It's so important because, it's an analogy that gets used a lot, but I think it's so important. You can't pour from an empty cup. And that importance you highlighted of community with your team, where sometimes those practices you're like, and also too, when you're just so exhausted as well, like those can be some of those first signs of potential burnout or that trauma, that vicarious trauma that's creeping in. But it's great to be in that community as well. That helps, pull you out. But there are moments too when we have to say, I need a breather and I need to maybe adjust and take a different course of action where I still am following my call, but it might just look a little bit different. And I know for us as well, we believe in following what we believe God's plan is as well, and leaning into his purpose and his call and his plan on our lives. And I think that's so beautiful just to hear even some of your testimony in that of really seeking the Lord and what is the next step and season of life. And but something, we've talked about as well, and you started to highlight that, was just even in caring for individuals that have gone through extensive trauma. And for us, of course, it will be individuals who have experienced sex trafficking, and for our staff and the importance. And we've, you had an opportunity to share even on our panel last year at our gala, and what an honor that was to have you part of that. And I think even there at the gala, you noted just how it takes so many different individuals to help a person through the initial reporting process, the healing and recovery process. And it's no one organization, it's no one individual, it takes a community. But in that though too, when an organization is providing direct care, it's important that we have the qualifications, that we are staffed well, and also that we're caring for our staff and our team. And that is something that we have noted is just so incredibly important for our staff, and that we don't just staff for the bare essentials for when we open the home, but our, what we're planning is that we would also even have substitutes that could come in if somebody needs time away and staff care and vacation, because we don't want a staff who's having to work every single day. But sometimes, and maybe it's not intended this way, community members or supporters may say, you've got the house, you have a few staff members or volunteers, just open. And when you hear that, and I see your face right now, like, what are you processing? And what is your thought when you would hear that?
I remember when we first met and when we first started learning about Greenlight, what I loved about you so much was that it was one of your most important goals was to do no harm, was to make sure that you do not do further harm. And if you open that house before you're ready, you're going to hurt your staff, and you're going to hurt these women again.
Yep.
They've been hurt enough. And so by doing the approach that you're doing and making sure that your staff is ready, making sure that you have enough staff, the training that you're doing, the intensive training is vital, because, this is domestic violence on steroids.
Yeah, it is. Yep.
It's a lot, and they don't have the coping skills, which means that they're going to be lashing out sideways, and you have to be prepared for that. And the home has to be ready for that. Yep. So I understand the misunderstandings that people have, but you really need to understand it in the world of trafficking. We have to be doing things the right way and trauma-informed in order to not do any more harm.
It's the truth. And I think you and I have seen firsthand in instances where that hasn't happened, where whether it's a survivor goes to a program and it's not equipped and, they don't last very long there, or we talk a lot about with Greenlight just how, unfortunately, traffickers are very consistent in their behaviors. They do what they say they're going to do. It's not in the good light, right?
No.
But I feel that sometimes as NGOs and in the line of care, we tend to be some of the most inconsistent in making promises and saying, we're going to offer this care, you'll have a year to stay here. But then the reality is, if it's not staffed properly, if the budget's not there, and you're 3 months into somebody getting that healing recovery, and then it's like, I'm sorry, we actually have to close up. You can't stay here any longer. In a way, we're fueling those misconceptions and those lies that they've been told, that maybe they're not worthy, they don't matter, nobody's gonna invest in them, and we've seen it too, where then they go right back to their trafficker, and
sure do.
They have that moment of, hey, there's hope and there's a glimpse of that, but just there's absolute defeat then that they're carrying back when these organizations fail. And so what was some of that even that you experienced? You don't have to, of course, share all those specifics of, organizations such, but what is some of the harm that when people with good intentions are moving forward or saying, I want to help, but sometimes that helping can hurt if it's not done well? And how have you even seen that in your line of work?
It takes a victim approximately 7 times to leave. It takes 7 good interactions with the system for them to start trusting again. Yep. And so if you have that first touch and it's a good one, and you start that, like, we'll go with your example, and they're in there for 3 months, and then they get kicked out, that's now a bad. And it has erased all of the good that we have done. So it is absolutely vital for these people. They relapse. They die. They go back. It's really, really important.
It's really, it's hard. These are people's lives. And if we don't do it right, the long-term harm that we can do is just, it's unimaginable. And it's one of those where we don't take this mantle lightly. And we have loved that about our partnership with you through the task force and now with Earth Ray, of you too are just, you're committed. You want to do it right, want to do it with excellence. You're listening to what survivors have shared of what is the need for them personally. You've seen what is the need in the region and are responding to that. And I think it's just so beautiful to see how approaches don't always have to be the same, and actually diversifying the approaches, we get to offer more unique opportunities. So we have a better chance of being able to have those 7 good interactions. And it might be with different groups and individuals, but when we build out that network and we know Earth Ray and Kim, this is a reputable, individual and group, we can trust that when we send a referral there that, it's going to be done with excellence. And so many of those other nonprofits as well, where we've built the relationships and okay, if I refer here, that there's going to be another yes and another good interaction, so that hopefully we hit that 7 and we can see that true healing, so that we don't have to experience that absolute heartache. And all of us experience that failure in the field when something doesn't go right, or somebody doesn't choose what you would hope for them. And I think that's another thing too we've always admired is, in a trauma-informed approach, there's choice that's offered.
Yes.
And that choice is very important, because even if we think that we are prescribing something that's so great and so good, but if that person feels forced into that, the likelihood that they're going to stick to it, or the likelihood that, really they feel like that is a decision they made. Sometimes in a way, if we're forcing that, even in a good way, we're really no better than the trafficker, because we've removed that choice.
That's right.
And so for you, what were areas and ways that even in a trauma-informed approach that you practice that in what you do?
I gave clients as much choice as humanly possible. Even down to, do you want to meet with me? Is it okay if I take notes? I'm not just going to come and sit down with a pen and paper and start writing their stuff out. And that can be a big trigger for people. Do you want to sit here or here?
Yep.
It's that basic. And then bigger things, are you interested in prosecuting? I've encountered, again, well-intended people who have heard maybe some stories from a victim and then gone and reported that for that victim. Now she's forced into a situation and it doesn't work out well.
It doesn't.
So it's really, really important that we're giving them the power of choice back.
It's huge.
They have most of them didn't have a choice in anything that they did. So, those basic choices of, would you like to sit here or there?
Yeah. And
it's starting to empower them.
It does. And you almost see it too when you ask those questions, or, hey, we're going to order some food, and where would you like to order that food from? Yeah. And it's like these moments where, and it's like, what? You just actually see like a lifting of like, wait a minute, this isn't right. Like almost like, what's the catch here?
Right.
But it's also equally, in my opinion, I find that equally sad, because it's like something so simple that we take for granted, of the freedom to choose where we're sitting, or the freedom to choose what food we're going to eat during the meeting, or whether I make a phone call to report this or not. We can so often take that for granted if we aren't living in that survival mode or processing, like, where is this next decision that I make going to lead me? And but with that, though, that choice is so important. And I think the partnerships are important, where I think collaboration is huge. And that's a key component for Greenlight. I know it's a key component for you. But I think strategic collaboration is very important as well, where choosing partners well is essential, because we have seen it in the field where just because somebody is doing similar work doesn't mean that they have the qualifications to do that, or that what they are doing is safe and helpful for survivors. Sometimes it can be harmful.
That's correct.
So how do you even navigate that when maybe there are the pressures of, hey, let's partner, everybody, let's gather, sing kumbaya. Like, how do you walk that out even for you and as you're venturing into Earthray?
Well, I think the vetting process is extremely important. Understanding and observing their behavior before just jumping in. And it also goes back to vicarious trauma. When I can hand off a client and sleep at night and not worry about that client, I'm in a good place. Yeah. If I'm handing a client off somewhere that I'm nervous about, or they're going somewhere, I'm worrying about that. Yeah. I don't have a light switch that I can just turn off. No. And so those worries build up. So it is absolutely vital that in our communities, we're partnering with one another, and we're knowing, who's doing quality work, who's walking with integrity, who's following through with what they say they're going to do, and who has the resources and the staffing to be able to follow through with those promises.
It's true. And so with that, in your roles that you've had, you've seen as well, naturally, and I think in a way, as I look at human trafficking and the human trafficking, anti-human trafficking field industry, in many ways, it's still being shaped and molded. And I often compare it to the domestic violence movement, where both have been in existence forever, domestic violence, human trafficking. But it sometimes takes a while for the public to acknowledge that it's happening and the prevalence of it. And for so long, many were in denial that domestic violence was happening. And for so long, people have been in denial that human trafficking is happening, let alone that it's happening here in our communities, in our schools, in our churches, at home, online. But through that, we are, I would say, in a cutting edge field where there's a lot that's still being shaped and molded and formalized. And we always ask people, we say, hey, have grace. We're going to see terms changing. We're going to see, better practices coming forward. We believe in being students always of this field and what's emerging and taking evidence-based approaches. And there's still such a huge need for research in the field. There's such a huge need in many other ways. So sometimes, we have the grace where sometimes we're just filling a need where we're able to, and you jump in. But there comes that point where, okay, as we're learning these best practices, how are we adapting to them and conforming to that so that we can continue to push things forward in the way of excellence? And so there's that piece, though, where I think even still as I analyze our state and our nation, we know that there's a major gap in services, that simply there are not enough aftercare services for survivors of human trafficking. And that could look like there's not enough aftercare services in counseling and coaching, mental health at large. in housing, job skills training, employment opportunities. There is a huge spectrum of need that still exists. And so how did you see that impacting even when you had hundreds of cases and individuals you were working with and trying to find placement and programming? What was that impact of not having enough facilities?
What was the impact?
Yeah.
Burnout.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard to try and to want and have the desire to help people.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard for this population to agree to want those services.
Yeah.
And then when you had both, and then you didn't have the ability to provide those services, it's heartbreaking. Yeah. We need the gap, and we need those gaps in services filled. Yeah. The jobs need to be created. Legislation needs to be written. My biggest thing, I think you know, are the kids.
Yes. Yeah.
You know.
Can you share, where are kids going currently when placement is not found for them with trafficking?
Detention centers.
Yeah. I don't think many people realize that. And that is heartbreaking. And I'm gonna turn my attention. Listeners, this is why advocacy matters and follow through matters, because we saw the safe harbor law get passed in 2018, I believe, that actually states that victims should not be treated as criminals and sent to detention centers and prisons. The follow through is not there. And the reason being is there simply are not enough services. So we have children who are being trafficked. Our foster care system, homes that can take children in, are so incredibly limited that these children that are victims of human trafficking are being sent to juvenile detention centers, being treated as criminals when they have been harmed, a lot of times by parents and family members, the people that they should trust the most. And so this is where your voice matters, community, and why we need to draw attention to this through education and through advocacy, and call our legislators and work with them and ask, why is this not being followed through on? Because our laws already state that they shouldn't be sent there. And so, Kim, you have seen this and walked through this firsthand, and it's gut-wrenching.
It is gut-wrenching. It was probably one of my tipping points.
Yeah.
We're not talking about for a day or for a couple hours.
Yeah.
We're talking about years. It's unacceptable, to have a child trafficked by their parents.
Yep.
And then the best that we can do as a state is to put them in a detention center. Mm-hmm. It's unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah. We should be able to do more of that.
Yeah.
What would you say, what do you see as a solution in what is happening currently? And sometimes they're phased solutions from, obviously, we don't have a lot of facilities currently, and this is where they're being sent, but what could even, whether it's phased or a long-term solution, be where we can help fix this?
Yeah, I think we need secure facilities, that are trauma-based.
Yeah.
That are not jails.
Yeah.
They need to be secure because these kids are run risks. They're going to run away. Yeah. They're going to try. They're scared.
Yeah. They're hurt.
They're hurt bad. And they must be given trauma counseling immediately.
Yeah.
That has to be, and it has to be followed through on, and not once a month.
Yep.
They need intense trauma therapy in a loving, secure facility.
Yep.
That's the solution.
Absolutely.
There's empty buildings all over the state.
Yeah.
And so the fact that we have not figured out and created a place for these children to heal is unacceptable in my mind.
It is. And this is where I think the importance of a community where we know different organizations, individuals, we might be called to certain things, but if somebody's feeling a prick on their heart to help be part of that solution, this is something that we would strongly encourage. Start learning about it, start talking to legislators, start trying to figure out what can we do about this. And I think I never want to downplay the innovation of people, because it's through innovation, it's through awareness that we can see just such beautiful solutions that come forward. Yeah. And I think there is a support network that's there in longing for something like this. But, with that requires resources. It requires people to actually acknowledge it's happening too.
Absolutely.
And I think for us, a large challenge that we have often had in the anti-trafficking field when it comes to funding for aftercare programming to even just the education is the outright denial that it's even happening. Yeah. And we have seen this from community members to state leaders, even law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And there's an annual report that comes out that highlights different counties and how many cases they've prosecuted and how many cases have come forward. And it is shocking to see the number of cases or number of counties in Pennsylvania alone that have 0 cases that have been identified and are prosecuted. And we often try to, flip that and say, a lot of them say, oh, we're doing great. We have 0, right? Right. And I'm like, oh, no. Something is majorly wrong here because we know it's happening. Yeah. My question is, why have you not done anything to identify these individuals or to prosecute? And you start to see the, oh, snap. Right. And I think, we look at it here, and you were part of this with Dauphin County when we're in the capital region of Pennsylvania. And I always go back to just that moment when we were sitting there in dreaming phase of this. And there were 3 cases at that time. And you guys quickly identified a huge reason for this is there's just lack of public education and lack of awareness. And not just for the public, but for investigators, for law enforcement, just we weren't looking for it. Right. The moment you guys started educating your teams and countywide trainings that you guys were facilitating, you guys started to see so many cases getting identified, or cases you already had that the markers for trafficking were suddenly being flagged or looked back on. And that's a challenge I would put out there to any community, any county of, if you believe that there are 0 cases, let's look a little bit harder. And I don't even think you're going to have to look that hard.
No.
It's there.
It's there.
And so with that, the same thing goes for, I think, with juveniles. Number one, numbers are so, in my opinion, they are so low because we can only go off of in the statistics, and what we have is based on what's been actually reported. Right. And because this is a largely unreported crime, many times we don't recognize the magnitude of how many individuals in certain demographics are being impacted by this. And it doesn't matter necessarily demographic. If it's happening to anybody, it's awful. If it's impacting one person, it needs to stop. But for our youth especially, and I know that with Greenlight, our education often surrounds how can we prevent this for youth? How can we help intervene? But there is such a need for housing for juveniles. There's such a need for care. And I just put that challenge out to anybody if they feel that that's something they want to get involved in. We need it.
Yes.
What are things for you that you wish that, or you believe that is just important for people to know and to understand, whether it's in the field of trafficking or on the side of healing and recovery, that's important for them to understand so that they can get involved?
I think first, it's happening everywhere. Yeah. Yeah. I think second, it's happening here in the United States. Yeah. So often I think that I think it's part of a lot of people's journey to realizing trafficking happens is to kind of identify, oh, well, it's happening there and they're being brought here. Or it's happening here and they're being brought here. But and then they realize it's happening here. Yeah. And for the kids, most of it's familiar. Yeah. And that's a really hard pill for people to swallow. Yeah. It's, again, child abuse on steroids, right? Mm-hmm. Are kids getting abused? They're getting abused at home, right? Yeah. So why is it really that hard to believe that an addicted parent might be selling their child for drugs? Yeah. It's happening. Get involved. Talk to, I think, in making sure that juvenile and probation officers and children and youth workers are educated in trafficking, because they're the ones that are having these contacts with kids. Yeah. I apologize, Jordan. I know I digressed on that.
No. You're okay. And we've covered a lot of territory, but I think you hit an important one on children youth services. Anybody who's working with children, period, needs to be trained on this.
Absolutely.
Law enforcement included. And that is something that just continues in the networks that we've built of, we always ask, how much training have you received on human trafficking? From teachers and educators to social workers, adoption agencies, foster care agencies. And I would say majority have never received any type of training on human trafficking. Or if they have, it's part of a slide deck that's just simply, here's the definition of it.
That's right.
And if that's all that we're doing and all that's available currently, then how, in a way, how are people going to even recognize it if they don't know what it is? It's a field we live and breathe regularly. Others don't. And so if they're not aware of it or they have those misconceptions of what it looks like, we're not going to see the impact that we desire. And so that's our education so important. And I'll put a plug out there. Greenlight Operation, we offer those free trainings and are able to go to schools and do that. And I will say most of the time, and you have done quite a few trainings as well, we often see reports come forward within the first, I would go as far as to say 2 days of having conducted a training. We will see that come forward, whether it's a child who self-reports or it's somebody who's working with the children and they recognize it. And it's just, man, if more people knew, but that doesn't solve it all. That solves a part of the complexity of trafficking of we've identified. But now where do they go? Where is healing and recovery? Where's the counseling geared towards children for this? And it's hard. It is hard sometimes to see the pace things move.
Yes.
Because excellence takes time.
Yes.
And that's hard.
Yes.
That is hard because you're like, I want to do it now. I want to serve now. And I think there are ways we can get involved in the now. But I think it's important for us to note that we have to build upon that. And there's more that needs to be done. We can't just settle for the crisis intervention, so to speak. There's just more there. It's a lot to process and think through even.
It is. But you're right. It takes time. Quality service takes time. Earth Ray is slow and steady because it needs to be right. It needs to be. And that's something that I learned from you guys. Oh, you're killing it with it. I appreciate it. The community is blessed to have you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing it right.
Yeah, thank you. It is just such a joy to be able to work with you and consider you a partner in the field. You two are also killing it and doing a great job and doing it right. And so just thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insight, talking through the topics that aren't easy to talk through. But thank you for being willing to do that because it helps to educate and make people aware of what they can do. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.